Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Content and Links. And today we're going to talk about how to write effective post titles for SEO that increase click-through rate by more than 20%. So here at Siege, we've been writing thousands of title tags that are high performing over the years. And as part of that process, we've learned some best practices that we're going to share in this video that will add up to those results that we've seen, both in our own tests and other great tests that exist for making those changes for SEO. So we're not just going to talk about how to write a great title or how to write a great title tag. It's effectively to merge those two together to create the best outcome for your business as it comes to search. So if you love videos that talk action and not fluff, make sure you jam that notification bell, subscribe, and follow along for more great content just like this. So the first section in particular, we're going to talk about the best practices for driving great click-through rate, period. So I think it's worth starting with the human first, and then thinking about the search engines as a way to properly align your goals to drive the outcomes you want for your business. So the first part that we originally wrote about a few years ago are the overall 5 elements that can drive click-through rate for your business in different ways. So this Venn diagram that we're showing on our screen shows the 5 different ways these can all coalesce. And some of them can be combined, some cannot. But effectively, the 5 elements are price, speed, volume, value, and then brand overlapping those 4. And each of these elements have a specific application that we'll talk through in the next step. So time to value is a great first one that effectively is stating if you can help someone get to value as fast as possible and indicate that in your title tag, they're going to be more likely to click you. So the following 6 examples are a great application of the speed to solution concept. You can see in these various different ways people are finding their solution faster, whether it's tying their tie in only 30 seconds, becoming that RN in 24 months, falling asleep in only 10 seconds or 60 seconds, etc., or otherwise giving someone a video so they can make those delicious hot chocolate bombs. These all connect to getting you to your specific need in a faster fashion. The next element is freshness. So effectively what freshness is trying to communicate is that your content is more up to date than the rest of the results on the search result. So there's a few ways to communicate this that are non-obvious or some that are very obvious. One is simply the year. This is the most common thing that you see. It often has long tail search volume, but you'll see 2022, 2023, whatever year you're in that says it's the best results for that year. And very often people are finding their query with this term to make sure they're getting the most updated content. So by including that in your title, you're doing a good job of that. It can actually work in your favor sometimes to actually take this further, especially in verticals where things are changing very quickly. So you'll see in credit cards, for example, they will actually even indicate the month to show they have the most up-to-date cards to that month. And users are showing that they care about these things and are really creating strong click-through rate for the things that are most up-to-date. And you can find this both in the title tag and, for the rare exception of this video, also the timestamp on the post itself. So if the timestamp is also recent, that is a click-through rate factor that you'll want to stay up-to-date and also should be reflected in the title. And the more often those timestamps are all in the last month, the more you might actually be able to include that in your title tag as well in terms of October 2022, etc., and actually drive click-through rate for your business in particular. Low price is the third factor that will really drive click-through rate if it makes sense for your specific business. So if you know you're competitive on price and can stay there, including that in your title tag can often drive a lot of value in clicks over competition because, of course, for most kinds of content, people want to pay the lowest amount they can to get the outcome they want. So if you have that solution, include it. Of course, be wary of the race to the bottom. Once you start including these kinds of things, you have to deliver on it. You can eradicate your margins, and that cannot be a good thing. But these 4 examples we're showing on the video are great examples of this in practice. So say, for example, you had a list of discounts and you knew that a few of them were up to $100 off. That could be a good thing to include. In the flights market, people actually show the lowest costs that exist. So I'm flying to Austin and it's only $28. That might drive me to click that. So I'm actually flying rather than driving to incur that $28 cost. And then on terms like cheap t-shirts, cheap clothing, etc., you will actually see things like $1 t-shirts because that is a very strong indicator that you are that low price result and more likely to buy from them if that's the kind of quality t-shirt you're trying to find for your wardrobe. The fourth non-brand factor is volume. So volume is effectively saying, I have more content on my piece of content than you, and because of that, are more likely to click you. So this is most relevant on inspirational searches where people want a lot of options to browse over. You'll see Pinterest on a lot of these search results. In general, if it's ideas, they tend to be more visual. Also, you see images on the search results. Also a good indication that people want visual inspiration because they're clicking that images tab to see a lot all at once. So if you know that's the case, having the most results, or at least a competitive number, will be more likely to drive click-through rate for you. So if you see everyone is in the 50 to 70 range, it couldn't hurt to be 75 to actually have that. But you need to be careful here because you don't want to do volume just for the sake of it, as it can actually work against you as well. So the common example I like to give is that with SEO tools, there are only so many go-to tools that you really need. You could list hundreds of tools, but really what you want is a curated list from an expert that you know you can trust of the major tools that you need. So on that search result, really, there's more like 15 tools that you truly need, and volume in that instance is not going to be a click-through rate factor for your business. And then finally, brand is that overlapping part of the Venn diagram that you always want to include, or almost always, if you have it. So brand is what you're going to want to put at the end of the title. And there, if you're strong enough of a brand, if you're Oprah, if you're Mayo Clinic, if you're Casper, that will actually drive click-through rate because people recognize you and associate with you and trust you, so more likely to click you because of that. In those instances, you always want to include your brand name at the end. And because of that, it will drive more outcomes for your business. You do need to be careful. Sometimes certain verticals, maybe it's impossible to establish a brand. And if there's only so many things you can include in the title tag, it might not actually be beneficial to not include it sometimes. But really, one of my counter arguments to that very often is that there's no better time than now to actually start building that, and including that in the title tag is just a good first step to actually signifying that value for you. So those are big 5 click-through rate factors just to always reference as possible additions to your titles. On top of that, something I like to share is just a good best practice to ask yourself when writing these titles is, could any SEO have written that title? Whether this is correlative or causative, I definitely think there's something there to the idea for humans, for real users that fit in your vertical. If an SEO that I pulled off the street could have written that title, you haven't gone deep enough. You're not really speaking to the user strongly enough, and potentially there's also a correlative factor with an overall strong brand experience that a true brand would try to do versus just an SEO who's writing the content for keywords. So examples of this in practice that I like to reference are, for example, Wealthfront versus Betterment. This concept, you would actually have to know what these products do to say robo-advisor. That's something unique to the vertical. An SEO I picked off of the street probably would not have said that. They would have said, what is the difference between these two, or something to that respect. And because of that, no SEO could have written that, or most SEOs could not have. And there's a lot of other examples here in that application. Like if we're talking about what is cryptocurrency, when you might say digital cash. That is a very specific jargon term within the vertical that you would need to know the vertical to say something like that. Other things like talking about future value for inflation and historical value, like those are unique elements that really you have to know yourself within that space. And I think all that can kind of connect to future value for your business if you try to push deeper and not just be an SEO and writing these titles. Other positive benefits that add value are things like adding brackets. So HubSpot actually did a study that showed including brackets actually increases click-through rate when you do that. I think this kind of relates to the idea of just time to value. Could be correlative or causative, but most of the time when you're adding brackets and you see in their examples, there are things like free downloads, templates, quick tips, FAQs. All of these things add value and I think are more likely to drive clicks because of that. Whether or not it's brackets or not specifically, harder to say, but at least is enough reason to say, include that add-on in your title and you're probably more likely to actually drive some clicks for your business. And another unique study that can drive some clicks that we found in our research is actually that odd numbers will often drive more clicks. I think this is especially the case in situations where titles have less authority behind them or needed authority. Say you're doing the 10 best restaurants in a location of the year, that probably makes sense to have some kind of rounded number. But if you're doing inspiration, saying 13 or 87 examples might actually mean you actually searched pretty hard and came to the conclusion that these were the actual 87 best. So something about that odd number seems to drive some clicks. Your mileage may vary, but there are a few studies that have pointed that out. So something to think about, especially when casualness is more relevant. So those are the click-through rate specific elements of this content, but there's also SEO specific elements that are at least worth considering as well. Just to be upfront about that, make sure you have all the considerations on the table. So the first part is simply to put the keyword as close to the front of the title tag as it makes sense. It's just a kind of obvious best practice, but if you're new to the space, it might not be. You don't always want to make it exactly the front. I generally like to say make it human language. So if it makes sense to say that, have it phrased that way. But an example might be the 10 best blank. Many SEOs might just write best mattresses, then changes, but that's not really how humans talk. So generally writing like a human, I think speaks to humans. It's also something that I think Google looks at as over optimization. So it's a nice balance as well. Another element is to make it the same as the post title. I very often will see a title tag that varies differently from the post title itself. This is a poor landing page experience and also possibly a negative SEO experience as well. When someone lands on a post and sees something dramatically different from what they just searched, that's just not great. Whether or not it's like 50% different or what have you, really the only thing that should change is your title. And very often I see these things relate to poor rankings because you're kind of scattered in your optimization, and it's possible you'll rank well for some things, but I would generally suggest connecting them as much as you can. Another element is to look at the search result, not just lean on your keywords. So sometimes you'll see keywords and then actually go to the search result and you'll notice what is showing in front of the title tags, and most of these are very different from that main term. This is often solving for that human language thing we just talked about, where Google knows the main term is actually meaning something else. For example, if you search content marketing or SEO, you'll see a lot of what is content marketing, what is SEO. Google knows that that's what people are looking for when they search those terms. So you actually want to lean into what the actual search result is telling you for that keyword rather than just using the keyword itself if you want to rank. Another blog specific element is to use the brand name only. And even better if you have a one word brand name, which might be obvious, but indirectly it makes an impact for SEO as well. So something we see specifically on blogs is sometimes people will put their brand name, then give it a specific content section name. And we've noticed generally that the longer your title, the more diluted the optimization becomes. So by making it very focused on your brand name only, because that's so powerful as click-through rate factor, you're more likely to do that. Adding Learning Center or blog rarely does anything for actually communicating value and will only dilute the overall meaning to the section, such that removing that makes the most sense. And similarly, I'm generally correlatively seeing one-word terms perform better for that reason. It might be indirect, but I think it's just another reason why one-words are better branding, is they might also have an effect of shorter titles on average and drive performance in that way as well. And on that note, just generally keep titles short. For some data there, Etsy has done a great job actually pulling out their own statistical A/B test and looking at the fact that if they break up and shorten titles, they'll get more click-through rate and better rankings on average. So that overall might be correlative again in Etsy's case, but I think points to that overall study. And we've seen the same in our own studies, that generally shorter titles are going to perform better for you overall. So another click-through rate study you can find on titles is from SEMrush, and they actually saw that hyphens, not pipes, actually drive more outcomes in search results. So take it for what you will. Our videographer actually prefers pipes. It's all personal preference in a lot of ways, and this probably isn't the biggest part of the study. Their case study didn't show any major impacts, but regardless, it is an impact, and it's one of those small things that you can do to add up to generate results. Might be something worth considering for your business. To pull it all together, I think something that's worth philosophically considering is the macro. How do I make writing better titles part of my DNA? I think this is kind of one of the things you have to think about, is everyone writes titles, but does everyone take them seriously? So something we do internally is we have rank tracking documents, and we actually have everyone include the URL and the title tag in those documents. These are probably the two most important SEO ranking areas. And if we're keeping an eye on rankings and looking at these, I think they'll be more likely to actually indicate and give us some thought process of when to improve them, when our rankings are off because of those titles, take them more seriously overall. So I think that's one good step. Screaming Frog makes it easy to pull all of your title tags into a spreadsheet very easily, so I suggest that. And then the other part is actually A/B testing this information. So these are all good best practice suggestions, but you really want to take this seriously, you should A/B test what we're saying to you. And the reality is you can't do a true A/B test in Google search results, but you can get close by optimizing these titles. So it's a little outside of the purview of this video to go into depth there. Check out our blog post in the comments below to actually see that detail in full. But the essence is try to have a control page or set of pages. Make sure you have enough sample size for them in a short enough duration. So you want to make sure the page is seeing a lot of visits. Otherwise, you'll run into Thanksgiving, you'll run into Christmas, and that data will change based on how users are behaving, and your rankings will change, etc. And then you want to measure, how did my click-through rate change? How did my rankings change? And then how did the control change or not? And if you see a set of pages all about X ideas on your website, and they're all very similar in terms of topic, and your title tag change created a 30% lift, that's overall going to be a positive, very confidence-inducing change. And that's your overall goal with these tests, is to have incredible confidence in the change, because otherwise it is just a guess and best practice. Not always is this possible, but at an enterprise size and with enterprise search volume, it is at least worth doing these kinds of tests at scale to make sure you're seeing the results you expect when you make these changes. So this is definitely a beast of a video and a post on post titles for SEO. I mean, this is a very important way of doing search, so that's why we think all these details are worth including. Hopefully it was of value to you. If you have any other thoughts, please let us know in the comments or by email or on Twitter or on LinkedIn, etc. But otherwise, please make sure you subscribe to our channel if you're digging videos just like this. Give us a thumbs up and comment below if you have any thoughts as well. Thanks for watching.